Hey friends, if you use this to fall asleep, perfect. That's why I make these. Tap subscribe and tell me where you are and what time it is. Same planet, different clocks. Let's begin. Picture this. You're kneeling in a dry riverbed at the edge of nowhere, stars pooling in the dark like spilled salt. Your headlamp finds a triangle of stone, edges glossy sharp as if it were chipped minutes ago, not hundreds of thousands of years. It's beautiful in that quiet, ruthless way tools are, too symmetrical to be an accident, too efficient to be anything but intention. You cradle it in your palm and feel that small static of recognition. A brain once lived here. Hands once learned on this rock. But the dates won't behave. The bones, if there are bones at all, say, no one like us was here. The tools say, someone was. And between those two voices is a silence big enough to fall into. That's the mystery we're walking into tonight. Why stone tools keep appearing in layers that predate the arrival of the people we think made them. Why a kit shows up early, then disappears, then shows up again as if a traveler keeps stepping in and out of time. You lean forward and the night leans with you. Let's read the ground. The flake in your hand carries a story in its geometry. The bulb of percussion where a blow detached it from a core. Ripples radiating across the surface like frozen rain. A platform, an angle, a negative scar where one strike set up the next. This is a language of fractures and pressure. You don't need carbon or DNA to hear it, just light and a little patience. An experienced napper, you've been told, can stand where you're standing and replay the sequence blow by blow, like unspooling a film in reverse. The riverbed gives you more. A biface, teardrop-shaped, thin from both sides until the edge was a continuous neon thread. Two thumbnail scrapers, their tiny radiuses perfect for cleaning sinew off bone. A core with facets like the faces of a crystal, each a memory of a strike. The whole kit is here, and the kit is wrong because it's early. Far, far too early for the owners we expected. How do you know it's early? The ground knows. And the ground keeps receipts. In the headlamp's ring you can see the sediments, a cross-bedded tongue of sand that froze where a current once ran. Above that a thin crust of caliche where groundwater carried lime upward and left it like a pale scab. Above that a lens of flood silt, brown and fine and laid down in a single pushy season. The artifacts lay pinned in the old sand, and that matters. Because when the desert builds a cake like this, the bottom layers bake first. Dating is a kind of midnight magic trick, but it's not hand-wavy. It's sand grain by sand grain, electron by electron. You collect a handful of that old river sand and snuff the tubes dark so no stray photon wakes anything up. In a lab days from here, someone will coax the grains to glow, optically stimulated luminescence, cell, and measure how long they've been sleeping since sunlight last reset their clocks. The number that comes back might be 180,000 years. Or 240,000. And the bones you were expecting, our bones, don't show up in this region until much later. The calendar doesn't line up with the kit. There are other clocks. Uranium series dating reads the slow drip of calcite in cave mouths, water that locked up at a known rate as a thin, glassy rind over tools left near the entrance. Electron spin resonance peers into enamel and quartz, counting defects like constellations in a tiny sky. Tephrochronology compares volcanic ash grains like fingerprints. A single eruption's glassy shards can be matched across continents. Radiocarbon? It's a brilliant clock, but it fades out around 50,000 years for most materials. The deeper past leans on other lamps. So we trust multiple clocks at once and look for agreement. When OSL whispers one number and uranium agrees, when the ash matches a known blast, when the stratigraphy makes sense, older under younger, floods silt atop river sand, no burrows, no disturbance. That's when archaeologists start to exhale. And that's when the hair lifts on your arms, because the kit is still early. You stand up, dust your knees, and let the macro scene bloom. From high above, the land is a breathing animal, arteries of river, a ribcage of dunes migrating mile by mile in a wind older than stories. Climate is a pendulum here. There were wet pulses when the river sang and lakes appeared like mirrors for the sky. There were dry spells when the water retreated underground and the days became a kiln. In the wet times, corridors opened, green stitches threading deserts, and travelers followed. In the dry times, those same corridors pinched shut and erased the trail. If a handful of people, 2 bands, 5 families, pushed through when the rains were kind and then died out when the land took its breath back, what would they leave behind? Not much that the years would keep. But stone keeps almost everything. Meanwhile, back inside the circle of your headlamp, you find a refit. 2 flakes that were once one, their zigzag fracture fitting together like the edges of a broken cup. Refits are the opposite of rumor. They're proof of in-place work, napping that happened right here, not stone carried by flood or rolled down slope. Whoever sat here split this flake from that core and then moved on. When? Your lampshade world says. A very long time ago. Your future lab says. Longer than our bones in this region. The flint says. I remember hands. It's tempting, in that late-night engineer's uncoffee way, to play the Boulder tape, Time Travelers. A gift left out of sequence. But the real story, the one with mud on its boots, is richer. It's about ghost populations, not ghosts as in spirits, but as in people we can only infer from what they made. Species we barely know by name, or not at all. Archaic neighbors we met and absorbed or missed by centuries, whose footprints did not fossilize, whose voices will never be found in a skull, but whose fingertips chipped edges sharp enough to draw blood. You walk the margin of the old channel, and the dates unfurl like a ribbon. Here, a scatter of Levallois flakes where a napper prepared a tortoise-shell core, then pried off ready-made points like cookies from a sheet. Further down, cruder flakes from the older Julian school, big ideas in big stone, a million-year habit that taught patience to thumbs. Different technologies, different ways to think in rock, stacked in unexpected order. The weirdness isn't that tools exist. It's which tools appear where, and when, and for how long before the rest of the orchestra arrives. A jackal calls from the slope. The constellation of Orion rolls one shoulder higher. You imagine a night like this 200,000 years ago. Same stars, same wind pressing the grass low. A small fire in a bend of the riverbank, people sitting close to it the way we always do, one person turning a core in the firelight, eyes flicking between their hands and the edge. Maybe they were us in the making. Maybe they were cousins with different brow lines and different songs. Maybe they were a lineage we haven't named, a thread snipped clean by drought or flood or accident, leaving only the edge behind. We do find bones sometimes. A jaw here, a finger there, shadows of body in limestone's cool archives. We find a tooth with an enamel code that says, milk from this valley, dust from that plateau, seasons turning like beads. But bones are shy. They need the right chemistry, the right burial, the right luck. Most bodies return to weather and bugs and root tips. Tools are fearless. They fall, they wait, they keep the appointment. So how do tools end up early? There are gentle explanations and stern ones. First, the gentle. We're not as good at finding bones as time is at hiding them. A population can exist for a blink of geological time, leave kit, and leave no trace of itself that survives erosion and animal burrows and the chemistry of dirt. Second, the stern. It's possible to misread the clocks. A burrowing animal can fold older artifacts upward. A flood can scour and redeposit a surface. A stone from a collapsed older layer can slide into younger beds and lie to your eye. Archaea don't sign their names, either does gravity. This is why archaeologists go back again and again, drawing sections like sheet music, marking every root trace and every soil change, looking for the sneaky signs of reworking, the telltale tilt of pebbles, a lens that doesn't match its neighbors, a pocket of alien sediment like a borrowed paragraph. When the story holds under that kind of cross-examination, when multiple dating methods converge, when the refits sing in chorus, when the stones lie where they fell, that's when the early kit becomes haunting instead of merely odd. You climb a low ridge and look across a country the color of old coins. The scale shifts again, macro. If humans are rivers, then migrations are floods and eddies and backwaters, not clean arrows. Populations surge forward and thin to threads. One dried lakebed becomes the gate between continents every 20,000 years, and then closes. A later wave crosses, looks down, and finds a previous wave's campsite. The puzzle we hold is layered with false absences and true ones. We mark the arrival of our species by the first bones we can date. But behavior can arrive before bones do, born by cousins. Or our bones can arrive twice, in pulses, the bold scouts and the settlers, and the first pulse can vanish before leaving anything but a lens of chips in an old sandbar. Down in the wash, your boots crunch on something darker than the rest. You stoop and lift a core of river glass, a black basalt cobble shorn like a peeled apple. Whoever worked it saw the same possibilities you do. A side-struck flake that'll be a razor. A platform left for next time. The core itself, still useful as a pounding heart. You slide it into your pack and keep walking because the ridge leans toward a cave, and caves are time's pantry. Caves are where groundwaters write their ledgers in stone. In the threshold, a faint line of flowstone gleams where ancient drips hardened into a crust thin as a fingernail. Someone once left a flake here, and the cave sealed it with calcium honey. In the lab back in a city that doesn't sleep, a mass spectrometer will read that rind like a poem, uranium to thorium, parent to daughter, a decay chain counting invisibly while empires rose and rusted. The number might make your stomach flip again. The rind began to grow 210,000 years ago. Our bones in this region? Later. The flake was already old when we arrived. Inside, the air is cool and smells like coins and damp dirt. On the cave floor, a soft apron of silt keeps quiet the comings and goings of bats. Someone, long ago, pushed a hearth against the wall where the smoke would be drawn by a draft you can still feel on your cheeks. Charcoal ghosts stain the limestone like thumbprints. Who sat here? Picture it, present tense. A figure backlit by flame, pressure flaking a point by fire's edge, turning it, testing it against a thumbnail, its edge skittering a bright line across keratin. A low hum, contentment, a rhythm, a warning. They look up because someone else is coming in from the dark with wet on their shoulders. We keep asking the same question in different rooms. Who were they? You'll hear words in the field that feel like passwords to other rooms. Achillean, Mysterian, Levallois, Hoacin's Port. They're technonyms, names for families of methods. They're our way of saying, these people thought like this with stone. And here comes the late-night twist that will make some sleep smile. A technology is a ghost you can touch. It's a habit of mind preserved in edge angles and percussion scars. Even when the makers don't leave their faces, they leave their choices. Consider a trick that arrives early in the record in some places, preparing a core carefully so that a single, controlled strike yields a flake of the exact shape you want, a turtle shell of raw potential that you unwrap. That's Levallois, and it's a sign of planning that warms whatever counts for a heart in a stone. Finding it in layers older than our first bones in a region is like finding a signature before the painting. Someone knew the trick. If not us, then kin. If not kin, then neighbors we met later in our blood. There are sterile stretches, too, decades of fieldwork where a valley is mapped and sampled and refuses to yield anything but wind. And then a flood eats back an old bank and a scatter of flakes smiles up at a student on her first survey. Our map of arrivals is written in that capricious ink. This is why the tools feel like time travelers. They're not cheating the calendar. We are. The calendar we drew is too neat. It needs coffee stains and torn corners and scribbles in the margins. The tools are our edits from the future to our past. Outside, the wind has shifted. You step into it, and the cave exhales grit and cold. The ridge picks up the sky again, and with it the sense that you're not alone in this mystery, that people who walked this watershed 250,000 years ago asked something like the same question in a smaller way. Who was here before us? They might have found a chipped core in a dry streambed and known, with the same quick prick of awareness, that edges don't chip themselves. Let's walk the ridge at the scale of continents for a moment. In the north, ice sheets advanced and retreated, locking up oceans and exposing land bridges like doors in a hallway that only open when the house is cold. In the tropics, monsoon belts shifted like a sleeping giant turning over, pushing green tongues into deserts then pulling them back. In this choreography, pulses of people moved, a push here, a stutter step there. Some pulses were us. Some pulses were cousins. Some pulses braided. Some frayed to nothing. The record in stone is one register of that music, the drum. The record in bone is another, the violin. In the next parts of this story we'll listen for the chorus, Jean's humming under both. For now, night thickens and the temperature drops enough to make your breath a pale animal trotting ahead of you. You find a place at the lee of a boulder, shoulder your pack against it, and sit. The core in your bag seems to radiate a small, serious heat that isn't heat at all but the intimacy of tool and mind, the old handshake across time. You think of the clocks again, grains that glow because the last sunlight they felt was 200,000 years ago, uranium atoms stepping down a staircase no one can see, tiny defects in quartz counting the years like scratch tallies in a cell. Each method with its own biases, its blind spots, its genius. Each a different way to say, this happened before that. And still, sometimes, the kit shows up too early. A hearth, flakes, the purposeful geometry of intention, and then nothing, and then much later us. That's the version that helps you sleep, in a way. Not cheating time, not aliens, not errors on every line. Just a series of arrivals and retreats, a coastal tide of people stepping onto a beach and then being pulled off again, leaving shells and fire scars and the edge of a blade among the pebbles. There's a soft logic to the vanishing. Small populations are brittle. A cut in the wrong season, a fever, a cougar in the wrong mood, a river that doesn't show up when promised, fragile lines go dark. It doesn't take a catastrophe. It takes normal life. We're the weird ones, the storm that didn't blow out. Our story is not a straight road but a braid. The early tools are the strands that ran beside ours for a while and then slid under. You close your eyes against the wind and let the night do what nights do, stretch time. Somewhere, a scopsol calls once, then thinks better of it. The core in your pack is older than your language and younger than the ridge. You decide to sleep a little and keep moving at first light. The ridge runs toward a canyon, and the canyon toward a high basin where lake mud remembers things even bones forget. If the time travelers left anything else, that's where it will be. For what it's worth, there's comfort in this. Every time we find an early edge we redraw the map of us a little kinder, with more crossings and more meetings, more neighbors and more chances to be surprised. The ground is not finished telling us who we are. It just prefers to speak after dark. At first light, you'll shoulder your pack and follow the pale strand of the ancient shoreline. Maybe there will be a hearth sealed under a clay lid aflood. Maybe the rind on a flake will glow with uranium's slow math. Maybe nothing. Either way, the ridge is a promise, and the promise is enough. You pull your hat over your eyes. The wind sounds like paper pages turning. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the lakebed waits, flat and gray and full of clocks. You step onto the pale lakebed at dawn, the surface crisp as unglazed porcelain. Overnight the wind combed it flat, and now the first light lays a thin blade of gold along every hairline crack. Footfalls make a soft ceramic thock. Far out, the color changes from pearl to ash where a shallow basin still remembers water. You kneel, press fingers into friable mud, and they come up dusted with mica that glitters like fish scales. This is where lakes keep their ledgers, season by season, a whisper-thin layer of silt, each summer a page, each winter a bookmark. If there were people here when this basin held sky, they might have cut reeds, baked clay, rinsed stone in their palms. What they left, their edge, their fire, sank and flattened into time. You move along a faint curve, the ghost shoreline, until the lakebed humps into a small, dry delta. The shovel's nose pearls up a ribbon of gray. At 25 centimeters, a peppering of charcoal appears, little commas of black. You trowel sideways, gentle, the way you'd peel a label you mean to keep, and the hearth reveals itself, a shallow, discolored oval with a darker center where a coal bed once kept the night kind. The edges are crisp, no burrows, no scours. You grin without meaning to. Fire is the oldest community. Even when we don't know the faces, we can feel the circle. No bones. Not yet. But a few centimeters beyond the hearth, the trowel clicks. You blow away dust and an angle, too straight for nature, winks back. A flake, triangular, with a platform trimmed just so, the ripples frozen like a pond in a cold snap. You find another. A third, and it refits to the second with a satisfying zipper, fracture lines dovetailing as if the rock wants to be whole again. The same right here proof as last night. Someone struck this core in this place, then stood up and walked on. Out past the delta, the lakebed's pale glaze gives way to a talus of cave broken from the low cliff. You aim for a dark oval near the base where nocturnal cool breathes out. Caves like this can be stingy with bodies, but they're generous with ash, with chips, with rinds of dripstone that grow like glass fingernails and date like calendars. And in the new way of things, caves are generous with something else too: genetic ghosts, a dust-thin memory that clings to damp sediment long after bodies have gone to powder. You slip a clean mask over your face at the threshold because this next part is delicate, as ritualized as tea ceremony. A little trench by the wall. Fresh gloves for each sample. Sterile scoops into sterile tubes. Sediment, ancient DNA, the miracle of catching shed molecules of skin, blood, saliva, feces from long-departed breather hands. With luck and patience and a laboratory that looks like a spaceship, some of the tubes you pack out today will become sequences tomorrow. Fragments that can be compared to a library of known genomes, like finding cousins at a reunion through the shape of their vowels. It's strange at first, to imagine dust holding identity. But the cave is a comb, and time is hair. Every generation leaves a little. Sometimes it's enough to say, "Hominin came here," even when bone refuses. Sometimes it's enough to say, "Not our kind, but kin." You sit back on your heels and let the cave widen in your ears. There's the faint driptick farther in, measured like a metronome hidden in stone. There's the rustle of a bat shrugging itself higher in the dark. You picture a night here when the lake still lapped the shore, a low fire, a scab of soot drawn up the wall like breath fog. A person knelt where you kneel and pressure flaked a point. The edge sang against their thumbnail, bright and mean. They looked up because someone else came in with wet on their shoulders. You can almost hear their language in the rhythm of the blows. Not the words, but the cadence. Consider strike, consider strike. Who were they? We don't have their faces. We may never. But we have their neighbors in our own cells. That's one way ghost populations make themselves known, not by bone, not by skull, but by the way certain proteins in your blood carry a signature that didn't originate in your direct line. You carry winter-old as caves in the hemoglobin genes you inherited from people who weren't exactly you. You carry high-altitude secrets. How to keep oxygen clenched in a thin sky that looks suspiciously like gifts from people who lived where you couldn't yet breathe. Once upon a very long time ago, a girl was born in a cave far away from here, in country of larch and snow. We call her by a lab label, Denisova 11, or the gentler nickname, Denny. What the lab found when it ground a pinch of her bone and read the spiraled ladders inside was an impossible kind of obvious. Her mother was a Neanderthal, her father a Denisovan. First generation. Their peoples had met before, this time, they made her. She lived and died and left us a handful of powder that said not only, "We met, but we were close enough to swap lullabies." And that's only the case we caught. Every modern human outside Africa carries hints of Neanderthal ancestry. Some of us, especially in parts of Asia and Oceania, carry little sparks that look like Denisovan lantern light wandering through our genomes. Not large fires. Fireflies. On the Tibetan plateau, a jaw was found in a high cold that snaps breath from a sea-level chest. No face, no skull, just a jaw and its teeth. Collagen preserved in its mineral bone carried enough of a signal to whisper, Denisovan, to a mass spectrometer, and the caves of the plateau yielded sediments with the same signature. People with that genetic toolkit were here long before our kind dared eavesdrop on the wind at 4,000 meters. In some of the modern families who live above the tree line today, a variant in EPS1, the gene that helps you engage oxygen like a locksmith at thin doors, looks like a Denisovan gift. A ghost left a key in the mat. We picked it up and kept climbing. Once you start listening, the whispers multiply. In West Africa, where ancient DNA refuses most invitations because heat and water scramble it, the signal hides in modern genomes as a kind of stubborn accent. Algorithms tuned to trace family trees find tributaries that split off too early, too deep to be any of the named cousins. Call them unknown archaic. Call them ghosts. Call them the neighbors we forgot to invite to the reunion. But the logic is the same. Somebody early and separate met our ancestors and left a little bit of themselves folded in. In our immune systems, certain defenses look borrowed from Neanderthals. The sort of handy back pocket trick you learn by growing up with cold caves and long winters. Ghosts are practical. Ghosts also carry sails. Walk east with me, across seas that used to be lower, over island chains that used to be closer. On Luzon in the Philippines, beneath a layer of red earth and a new century's worth of war stories, archaeologists found a rhinoceros skeleton nearly 750,000 years old, its bones butchered clean, cut marks across ribs, percussion pits on limb bones, flakes and hammerstones still sleeping nearby. Who did it? Not us. Not then. A hominin, maybe an early Homo erectus cousin, maybe another branch entirely, was on that island long before we were. To get there, they had to cross water. Maybe a flood raft of tangled roots ferried them. Maybe they built something on purpose. Either way, the strait did not stop them. On Flores, further east, small-bodied people we call Homo floresiensis, the hobbits, in headlines, a nickname that hides as much as it reveals, crafted tools in caves where the drip still ticks. They walked upright, carried fire, and hunted pygmy elephants in forests that smelled like wet rope. When the first modern scientists found their bones, they argued with each other for years about whether small bodies meant disease or difference. The island answered with more and older. These were not us diminished. These were a lineage that had taken a fairy into its own shape. When did they arrive? The stone says long before we did. On Sulawesi, a crescent-shaped island straddling the shadow line called Wallace's, artifacts appear in beds older than our travel logs admit. Edges without owners. And there's rock art on the same island, a pig limned in pigment more than 40,000 years old, older than most of our cave art in Europe. Someone with eyes like ours, and hands like ours, and a mind that could hold the idea of a pig plus the idea of ochre plus the idea of, I want this to last, stood in that cave and lifted a brush. Who? We think our people were there by then. But stranger things have been true, and the earliest scratches often belonged to the quiet hands. Turn west now, to Arabia when it was green. The desert today is a lion turned to bone under sun. But in certain breaths of the planet's long sleep, monsoons ride farther north, and the peninsula grows lakes like coins spilled across a floor. You can still find their circles from space, pale halos of carbonate where water once remembered itself. Along these lakes, stone toolkits appear in waves. Some are Acheulean, big, hand-filling axes. Others are levallois, precise and premeditated. The dates here thread a needle. In some intervals, the tools look older than our bones are supposed to be on this route. Interpretations differ. Maybe cousins made them. Maybe it was us, earlier and less enduring. Maybe both are true in different seasons. The landscape argues for corridors and closures. Ghosts love thresholds. India tells a similar set of riddles. Near Adirampakkam, layers of earth stacked in a patient trench show a long apprenticeship in stone. For hundreds of millennia there's Acheulean, a tradition old as courage. Then, a shift appears, cores are prepared differently, flakes pop off like answers to a question asked hours earlier. Levallois, again, the mark of minds that shape the before to control the after. The dates here drop jaws in labs. Either relatives with the same idea walk this ground, or ideas themselves migrate like herons, landing where the reed beds are ready. Later, a super eruption from a lake in Sumatra drapes ash across India like a grey blanket. The toolkits before and after that ash look remarkably similar in some places, as if people crouched under a dark noon, waited out the fall of dust, and picked up their edges when the sun returned. And China, where a farmer's plow, a bulldozer's blade, a curious child's pocket have changed our timelines more than once. In lost deposits south of the Chiling Mountains, stone artifacts turn up in layers older than 2 million years. That's not our story. That's older human stories. But layered later in the record are sites where toolkits come and go as if populations pulse like breath. A mandible on the Tibetan plateau hints at Denisovan occupation high and cold. Later, our people arrive and carry genes that look as if the plateau taught them through others' mouths how to breathe. It's easy to fall in love with the romance of ghost species. It's also easy to twist the story into something ghosts don't deserve. So here's the late-night sincerity. Ghost is a placeholder for humility, not a costume party. It means the bones haven't joined the conversation yet, but the tools and the dust have cleared their throats. It means our map will be redrawn, not that it was wrong to begin with. And it means we get to hold two true things at once. Humans like us did things earlier than we had proof for, and humans not like us did things we recognize as ours. You leave the cave with a small bag of bright futures, sealed tubes from the wall, a few charcoal smudges wrapped like tiny flowers, notes that make sense now and won't later. The day has gone white. On the lakebed, heat already wobbles above the ground like breath. You pocket the pencil behind your ear and walk the long arc toward camp, watching the shadow of a kite hawk not move at all. Macro now. Let's unroll the atlas on the ground and mark the doors. The Sahara, green in pulses, sewage-brown rivers looping out where there is nothing now but stone. The Sinai, a narrow isthmus of acacia and wet knees connecting continents. The Levantine corridor, a wind-carved gutter that invites and evicts in equal measure. The Bab el-Mandeb Strait, whose name means Gate of Tears. That can narrow to a swim in the right ice age, a heartbreak in the wrong one. The Persian Gulf, sometimes an inland savanna with rivers and lakes, an invisible refuge under today's sea. The island chains of Wallacea, stepping stones that exact a price in courage. The Bering Land Bridge, broad as a province when oceans are swallowed by ice, gone like a rumor when the meltwater arrives. Each door opens in cycles, and each time it does, someone knocks. Sometimes it's us. Sometimes it's kin. Sometimes both arrive from opposite directions and share a fire for a season that's 100 years long. Micro again, into one of those seasons. You're at a green Sahara lake, ankle deep, with a spear shaft against your shoulder that still smells like sap. Your aunt is scraping hide on a flat stone that flashes mica. Your brother is turning a core and frowning the way he does when the world doesn't line up on the first try. Across the water, strangers. They stand like you do. Their hands move like yours do. But their brow line is heavier. Their voices ride a different rhythm. Your uncle lifts his chin. He doesn't smile. He doesn't not smile. The strangers do the same. A little later, one of their kids and one of yours kick a stick back and forth at the shoreline, and the parents pretend not to see. That night there is one fire, and two languages, and a kind of quiet that is either hostility or concentration. By dawn, someone has learned a new edge trick. By noon, someone has learned a new lullaby. A year from now, a child will be born with a nose like neither side and a laugh that both recognize as human. We're fond of saying, they vanished, as if entire peoples evaporate. But what vanishes, usually, is distinction. A group becomes a memory, or becomes a story someone tells while cutting meat, or becomes a set of tendencies in the way a hand reaches for a tool. What vanishes is the clean line. What remains is a braid you only notice if you comb down to the scalp. Ghosts turn up on islands with homemade boats. They turn up in high caves with lungs full of borrowed tricks. They turn up in DNA like thimbles passed down a family's women until nobody remembers why there's always one in the drawer. They turn up as the part of your immune system that overreacts to pollen and underreacts to snakes. They turn up as a stone technique miles and ages from where we thought it was taught. They turn up in the lakebed's pages beyond your boots, in a hearth that lacks bones, in a flake with a platform snapped off at the exact angle a teacher would recommend. At noon the heat hits a pitch that makes thought wobble. You plug in a shade cloth and lie under it watching the world simmer. The ridge beyond camp shakes like a held bell. It's a good time to think about absence. Not the tragic, sighing kind, though there's that too, but absence as a method. Archaeology is a confidence game we play with missing things, asking what would have had to be here for these other things to exist. If there is a Levallois core here, prepared in stages struck just so, there is not just a moment of cleverness but a tradition, a teacher, and standard that says, "No, not that angle, this one." Tradition is people repeated across time. Afternoon wanes. You prep the day's small hoard for travel, flag each bag, photograph each profile, log each coordinate. The sun drops toward copper. In the distance a stripe of cloud forms, hard-edged like a shelf. Somewhere it is raining on a place that was once a lake a kilometer wide. The thought follows you as you shoulder the pack. This landscape makes and unmakes invitations. Populations accept and decline. A tool tradition takes root here in a wet century, goes quiet in a dry one, returns in the next wet as if it had waited underground. If you only look at bones, you might think the music stopped. If you listen to edges, you hear the song continue in a different key. The cave's tubes clack in your pack as you crest the ridge. You imagine them in their sterile cool tomorrow, air filter hush, gloves snapped, the lab's negative pressure whispering like a nurse. Technicians will coax DNA out of grains and pores, out of charcoal's micro caves, out of little glass sponges of silt. The sequences might be short, hopping like stepping stones between long, erased stretches. But the hops can be enough. Hominin, bear, horse, goat, and, on good days, Neanderthal, Denisovan, modern human. A few years ago, the idea of hominin DNA in cave dirt with no body would have sounded like fiction. Now it's field kit. Ghosts love progress. On the walk back down, the story turns unavoidably toward a new layer of question, the kind that will dominate your mind in the next stretch of this journey. These early kits, the hearts without owners, the ghost genes in our bodies, they're persuasive. But their dates are the axis everything turns on. If the clocks are wrong, the ghosts go out. If the clocks are right, the map moves. Part 3 is where you put the clocks on the table like watches you inherited and ask whether they're keeping good time. Before you sleep, one more micro moment to carry across the part break. You stop at the hearth you half excavated on the delta and press 2 fingers to its edge. The silt is cool. The charcoal is fragile and coats the glove in a smudge darker than night. You smell it, and because you are a ridiculous animal, your brain tells you it smells like yesterday's fire. 200,000 years, give or take, and your nose says, "Evening." You laugh, head shaking at yourself in the empty country. You bag the sample and stand. The lake bed looks like a chalkboard. Tomorrow, the lesson is numbers. Let the night unspool. Ghosts aren't gone. They're the reason you're warm under this thin fabric, the reason a thought can sit in your skull and recognize itself in strangers. The lake's pages turn in the dark, measured by a drip in a cave and an electron in a grain. In the morning, you'll pack the clocks and walk them into the world. The lab hums like a quiet reef. Air moves with intent. Doors kiss shut against your shoulder. You trade desert dust for paper gowns and nitrile, hands suddenly bluer than they feel. The tubes you carried across the lake bed last night sit in a tray like seedlings, cave rind, hearth charcoal, lake silt. In this light the mystery goes flat and precise, all decimals and protocols, the romance exhaled so the work can breathe. Numbers first, then stories. In a dark room the size of a single breath, the luminescence reader waits. Quartz and feldspar grains from the lake bed, powders you fed into stainless steel cups, have been preheated, bleached, irradiated, tempted. This is what the night taught you to call magic. Electrons trapped in crystal defects while time and radioactivity nudge them upward like bubbles in a bottle. Hit them with just the right light, and they glow. The brightness is dose. Dose plus dose rate is time. OSL, optically stimulated luminescence, doesn't date the artifact. It dates when the sand around it last saw unfiltered sunlight, when it was last zeroed, before burial. If the hearth sits cleanly within those sands, OSL is the heartbeat you can hear with a stethoscope. You watch the first growth curve crawl across a monitor, The staircase built one artificial dose at a time, the SAR protocol, single aliquot regenerative, stepping like a careful climber. The lab tech, eyes amused above their mask, ticks off the ritual, preheat to empty shallow traps, test dose to check sensitivity. More doses, more points. A recycling check to make sure the grain remembers itself between rounds. The line fits well. In your notebook, 208 Ka plus or minus 15 for the lower lamina. Another sample, a little higher, 197 plus or minus 12. A third, at the hearth level, 205 plus or minus 14. The three numbers sit together like kin at a table who almost never agree and tonight inexplicably do. It would be easier if the world always behaved. It doesn't. So you go hunting for the traps anyway. Partial bleaching, grains not fully reset before burial, can make OSL look older than truth. Rivers do it. A flood rips a sandbank and throws grains into shade, and some go under before the sun gets its say. So you don't trust single grains living in averages. You run single grain analyses, each quartz spec a tiny vote. Most shout 205 Ka, a few vote older, graybeards who slept through the last day. You use a minimum age model, letting the well-bleached subpopulation lead. The answer holds. Signal saturation, the crystal's inability to store more electrons after a point, can make very old samples look falsely young. Your doses are well below that ceiling. The curves still climb as they should. Feldspar's famous, anomalous fading, a slow leak of signal that cheats time, doesn't touch your quartz. You checked it anyway, because habits save lives and dates. Dose rates, beta, gamma, cosmic, have been measured in situ with a gamma spectrometer you set on the lakebed while swallows stitch the morning, and again in the lab with high-purity germanium counting. Moisture corrections account for the lake's previous life. More water means less radiation dose, which means the time is older than a dry calculation would allow. You've been stingy. The numbers don't mind. Across the hall the cave rind waits under a microscope like a contact lens from someone giant. In a U-series lab that smells faintly of ozone and clean metal, thin shavings of calcite, grown layer by layer as water bled down the wall, are dissolved so delicately you feel rude just standing there. Uranium decays to thorium at a rate the universe printed under glass. If the system stayed closed, no uranium in or out since the rind grew, the ratio is a clock. Detrital thorium, the dirt hitchhiker that lies about ages, is corrected with isochrons and a small algebra that wears a cape. The answers land with a soft thud. Initial precipitation begins 205 plus or minus 8 Ka. The rind covers a flake that lay there before it grew. The flake is older than the rind that hides it. The hearth in the delta and the dripstone on the cave wall nod at each other across the basin. You let yourself grin into your mask. Then you stop. Charcoal. Radiocarbon hates you this old. C14's clock, elegant and friendly in the Holocene, runs out of breath somewhere past 50,000 years for most materials. Still, you tried the tiny smudges from the hearth because hope is a primate habit. The accelerator mass spec, an instrument that weighs single carbon atoms like souls, spits back a thing that looks like 43,000 years. The lab flags it, contamination likely. Humic acids wormed in from younger seasons. Bioturbation smeared younger carbon into an older lens. A root's ghost snuck across your trowel. You expected as much. You don't build a chronology on the one method that had no business being helpful. You use radiocarbon here as a thief detector, not as a kingmaker. It waves red, you thank it, and set it aside. In a corner that feels like a chapel, blocks of lakebed are turned into glass. Micromorphology, thin sections of sediment seen with light knife through them, tells whether the hearth is where it slept. Under cross-polarized glare, silt platelets lie flat. They haven't been overturned by burrowers or frost heave. Ash particles are angular and sharp, not tumbled or leached. Charcoal sits in a neat lens with a halo of reddened grains, a heat aureole like sunrise. Between laminae, no tongues of younger material push down, no sneaky tubes filled with modern dust connect top to bottom. If anything moved here, it was water carrying silt while a lake breathed. Stones have more integrity than we deserve. On a bench by the window, a tooth. Enamel like moonlight. Above it, most likely, someone's dinner. ESR, electron spin resonance, reads the unpaired electrons in that enamel, spins out a spectrum like a barcode. But enamel is not a perfect jar. Uranium can enter over time. How fast it enters, fast at death, early uptake, slow like a leaky faucet, linear uptake, or something in between, changes the tick of the clock. You model EU, LU, and the usual suspects of mixed cases. You use the cave's chemistry to choose priors. The ages are cousins again, 198 plus or minus 30 Ka depending on the model's shyness. You don't force agreement, you watch it happen. On the next bench, a small miracle of dust, cryptotephra, volcanic glass shards sieved from anonymous silt like feathers from a pillow after a storm. Under SEMEDS their chemistry sings a signature, the exact balance of silica and alkalis that marks a faraway eruption like handwriting. Not Toba's famous 74 Ka blanket, your lenses live well below that. Something older, regional, a caldera that coughed when lakes still drew swans where the basin now drinks dust. The shards sit above your hearth, not within it. They won't date the fire. They do tell you the section is intact, a airfall layer perched like a bookmark exactly where wind meant it to land. You do what you came here to do, you bring these clocks together, and ask them to sit in the same sentence. You open Oxcal and its Bayesian grammar, priors as polite assumptions, likelihoods as manners, posteriors as what you actually know after you've listened. You build the little poem of your section, basal silt, lower O cell, 208 plus or minus 15, hearth horizon, 205 plus or minus 14, rind, greater than 205 plus or minus 8, upper silt, 197 plus or minus 12, tephra above. You include the ESR tooth with its wide, honest shrug. You give the model a stratigraphic spine, older below, younger above, and let it breathe. The posterior slides a little, smooths its hair, and says what the field said by starlight. The fire is 206, 212,000 years old. The cave flake is older than 205. The lake's pages were turning then, thin and even like a careful hand. If this basin were in a place where our bones are supposed to arrive at 120 or 100 or even 70,000 years ago, your dates would be an argument that walks in without knocking. Tools, hearth, flake, all 100,000 years too soon for us. If the basin sits in a crossroads, Arabia when it was green, a Levant damp enough to grow willows, then your clocks join a choir you've heard before in papers with crowded author lists, corridors that opened, populations that tried, ghosts that cooked fish at lakes which would later become rumor. Precision is not the point, coherence is. The clocks agree on the season. The hearth burned in a winter our maps don't yet circle in red. You take the result out of the lab and into a small room with a whiteboard and a couch that pretends it's a bed. This is where the second guessing lies, with a stack of soft blankets. You list in a handwriting the color of field dirt, all the ways you could be fooled, and cross them off if you've earned it. Reworking? Micromorph says no, lamini flat, ash angular, no burrow infills. Refits in the delta shout in situ. Partial bleaching? Single grain minimum age modeling, plus bleaching proxies from modern analog sandbars, say the buried grains forgot the sun properly. Signal saturation/fading? Quartz doses far from saturation. Feldspar checks run as a courtesy. No fading correction needed. U-series open system? Isochron corrections small. Growth bands clean. Multiple subsamples match. ESR uranium uptake? Modeled across EU/LU. Wide air absorbed. Still brackets the hearth. Radiocarbon? Threw itself on the grenade and died bravely. Contamination likely. Not in the model. Tephra reworked? Glass shard sharp, not rounded. Chemistry coherent. Sits where wind laid it, not slumped into older beds. Slope processes? Section is horizontal in the trench. No imbrication. No dip to argue with gravity. Cryoturbation? Wrong latitude, wrong soil structure. Thin sections lack the telltale tongues. Roots? Rodents? No tubes, no fecal pellets, no excrements politics at any scale. You leave a few unchecked boxes because humility is better than sleep. But the weight of evidence leans all one way. You say it out loud to the couch, tasting the words. The hearth is 200,000 years old. The flake under dripstone is at least that. The lake was a mirror then. The hands who made the fire and taught the edge move outside the clean arrival time we give ourselves in this place. Who were they? 2 ways through that door, both lit by low lamps. First door, cousins. Neanderthals on a foray into greener latitudes before ice shouldered them back. Denisovans tasting a corridor we don't yet understand, perhaps moving along mountains the way trout work a river's faster seams. Archaics, the West African ghosts' old world relatives, migrating, lingering, leaving nothing of their bones here and everything of their habits. If the cave's sediment DNA whispers someday when the lab finishes with your tubes, if damage patterns, those cytosine to uracil scars that time writes, say hominin, and a few reads say, not quite you. Then the hearth smoke belongs to a choir we can hum to and not yet name. Second door, us, earlier and brittle. A wave of Homo sapiens, thin as a rumor, brave as hunger, using the same wet corridors your map traced with a finger last night. A first arrival that did not endure, overwritten by drought or distance, or the indifferent math of small populations. Pockets that winked on for a few centuries and winked off for millennia until another climate swing opened the door again and a thicker stream came through, bringing more bodies, more babies, more chance to fossilize. Both doors could be true in neighboring basins. Both can even be true in the same one, separated by the thickness of 3 lake laminae and a small change in wind. There is a third option that sits at the threshold between them. Ideas migrate faster than bodies. Technology is a contagion of the useful. Levallois cores show up in places where bone says, not us yet, but hands are hands. Contact zones, the Green Sahara's brief lakes, the Arabian Peninsula's monsoon-stroked threads, are classrooms with no chalk, just flint. You do not need to share a language to notice a better angle. You do not need to share a lineage to inherit a trick. The hearth may be our cousin's camp. The flakes may be our future showing up early as a borrowed habit. In the morning you might wake and decide the phrase, tools before humans, is Mizran, it is. Tools before these bones. Or, tools before we started to keep the bones. The edge doesn't care whose thumb napped it. The edge keeps the mind that made it. You let yourself out into afternoon, back into the bright. The desert is still there, patient as a dog that has already forgiven you for leaving and will forgive you again. The wind picks up. The ridge draws lines against the sky the color of preheated metal. Numbers in your pocket feel heavier than tools. Macro, one more time, because the numbers ask you to relearn the scale. Earth's orbital tunes, eccentricity, obliquity, precession, are metronomes too slow to hear while a kettle boils. But they move climate zones like furniture. When obliquity tilts the planet toward more generous summers, monsoons reach fingers into Arabia and the Sahara. Lakes pulse. When precession lines up continents under particular sunlight, the range shifts aisle. These Milankovitch beats, glacial and interglacial, open and close doors. If your hearth is 206, 212 Ka, it likely sat in one of those permissive intervals, when the lake rose and the caravan of species, including us and not us, walked it like a corridor. Our maps that name arrivals by continents miss that the doors don't belong to continents. They belong to cycles. The ghosts keep better calendars than we do. Micro, to close the day, the lake bed again at blue hour. The lab is behind you. The ridge is a shoulder. You sit by the hearth you unwrapped, and imagine the fire alive. The charcoal you smelled this morning is not a scent anymore but a geometry. Rings of heat and sediment, black specks under a scope, a percent modern carbon that doesn't help. And yet you can feel it in your jaw the way you can feel thunder in your teeth when the storm is close. You put a hand to the ground and the ground gives you back the low throb of the planet's clocks, the ones in crystals and ribs. Tomorrow is for the last turn in this story, the quiet reveal that the time travelers were never cheating time. They were waves, and we are made of their water. Denisovan breath riding your EPS1. Neanderthal warnings doing triage in your immune system. Unknown neighbors lending a trick and a thumbprint you carry as a freckle in your genome you didn't ask for and won't give back. Tools appear before humans, because humans is a costume we change into slowly, with help. The wind goes from warm to almost kind. You half stand then don't. Night will come in from the edges of the lakebed the way it did for them, with bats making calligraphy in the upper dark. You'll shoulder the numbers in the morning and take them for a walk up the corridor they describe. If clocks can be trusted, and tonight they can, you've got a date with a pass in the hills where the rains once braided two worlds together. It's not far. You'll be there by noon if you leave at first light. And at first light, that's exactly what you'll do. Fold the lab's decimals into the map's green and go looking for where the corridor breaks into bowls that catch water and memory, just long enough for a stranger's fire to leave you its warmth. You set out at first light, the basin flattened to pewter behind you, the ridge ahead cut from milk blue air. The path threads into bowls that hold the last of last winter's rain, shallow saucers of green where reeds make a hissing sound and dragonflies draw cursive on their own reflections. A corridor is just that, a chain of bowls. In wet centuries, they overfill and talk to each other. In dry ones, they go silent. If people moved through here 200,000 years ago, they did it the same way you do now, bowl to bowl, listening for water. Near the first lip you find a stone that glints even before your eyes explain why. A river pebble, pitted and glossy at one end where it struck again and again, hammerstone polish, unmistakable. The other end is raw. Someone carried it up from the wash and used it here where the wind never runs out. You turn it in your hand, trying not to imagine the hands that did the turning last, failing, because the stone remembers angles your wrist repeats as if taught. You crest into the pass and the world opens like a door pushed with both shoulders. Valleys braid downstream in three directions. One branch leads toward the basin you've been reading. One trusses itself into a higher country where the lakebeds are smaller, the winds meaner, the stars nearer. The third tilts toward a plain that, once in a long while, becomes a river when a stubborn cloud gets generous. If you were a population in a permissive climate, you could split here like water. If you were two populations meeting from opposite bowls, you could share a night, then continue on with a borrowed trick that outlives the meeting. From up here the planet's big metronomes feel less theoretical. Obliquity, precession, eccentricity, the quiet triangles the Earth makes with itself, don't wear lab names on this ridge. They are simply the reason reeds sit in these bowls at all, the reason a wind is green-smelling one century and alkali the next. They are why doors on the map open and close. The second bowl holds a lighter miracle. A scatter of long, thin flakes whose scar patterns run like fish bones, struck off a prepared core. Levallois logic again, the before shaped to control the after. You could teach a child to see it in an afternoon. The child would get it. So would the cousin child from the valley over. The trick is not a passport, it's a contagion of the useful. Standing here, you can almost hear two languages swap edge angles without agreeing on a single noun. You stop and let the scales switch. Macro, the Bab el-Mandeb narrowing in cold times until a human could gauge it with their eyes and say, maybe. The Sinai is a stitch, sometimes there, sometimes threadbare. The Gulf is a drowned savanna with rivers drawn in light under today's water, a lost pasture modern divers would call myth if the sonar didn't disagree. Wallach's stepping stones tallied in storms and days. The Bering Land Bridge broad as a province when seas were hoarded in ice, gone like a thought when the thaw arrived. Every corridor with its own tempo, its own politics of wind and depth. Micro, a family at the rim of one of these bowls on a spring evening, smoke silk lifting into a violet sky. A stranger's band at the far edge, mirrored in the water. Two children invent a translation with sticks. Someone learns a new cut. Someone learns a song meant for sleeping babies and finds that it eases the temper of a skittish dog. In the morning, two bands are only one fire apart, but the habits in their hands have already braided. You shoulder the small pack that carries yesterday's numbers like coins and follow a game path that sidles up the pass. On a ledge that feels almost arranged, A flat stone bears 4 scars where something sharp bitted in sequence, like a practice board. You photograph it, log the coordinates, and think of the lab with its filtered air and steady hum. If the cave tubes you carried out from the basin have anything to say, they'll say it there. Sediment DNA is the softest magic. It asks dust to remember breath. In the clean room later, gloves new, masks new, the world pared down to laminar flow and patience. The technicians will coax fragments from the cave wall that were never meant to last. The sequences will be short, most of them nonsense, but a fraction will stick to known ladders like burrs to wool, bovid, hyena, owl. And then, on good days, the reeds that matter will flicker into place with the telltale damage patterns of age, cytosines shaved to uracils at their ends, Time's handwriting. Hominid, the pipeline will say, first with a shrug, then with a little more confidence. The best days pin the signal further, Neanderthal-like, Denisovan-like, sometimes indeterminate but not modern. If modern threads appear, maybe they sit in younger sediment above the rinds. Maybe not. Caution is the rule that gets the most sleep. But even without the lab's later whispers, the clocks in your pocket speak enough for this ridge. Hearth 206, 212 Ka in the basin, flake under cave dripstone growing by 205. A corridor that would have been a river of bowls in the right precession beat. Tools before bones? Only if bones is shorthand for our bones. The artifacts here aren't cheating time. The map of arrivals is. It's been drawn in tidy arrows where the wind prefers spirals, in single lines where the truth is a thicket. You climb to a saddle where lichens the color of ash pretend to be frost, and sit in the lee of a boulder to let the mind shift from stone to blood. Present echoes live in flesh. Some of them hum under your sternum every time a city elevator makes your ears pop. EPA's 1, the high-altitude switch that lets oxygen in at thin doors, looks in some people like a Denisovan gift, a key passed on at a campfire so high you could scrape stars with a bone point. Toll-like receptors, sentries of the immune system, carry Neanderthal pronunciations in many of us. They bite hard at certain strangers and let others pass with a nod, which is narratively satisfying and biologically inconvenient if you live surrounded by pollen and cats. Keratin genes, fat metabolism tweaks, even the way your skin blushes or burns, long echoes of neighbors who met your ancestors in a green corridor and taught them quiet edits to the manual. Behavior lives here too, though it's harder to name. The habit of carrying fire forward. The contagion of edges. Endurance. A ridiculous, wonderful trick that turns sweat and stride into heat management so good we outlasted antelope at noon. The ritual of a circle after dark where information moves faster than hunger. You see it in laboratory light as much as firelight, skills migrating faster than people migrating because of skills. A Levallois core is the ancestor of every jig you've ever built in your garage and every template you've ever downloaded, shaped the before to control the after. The bigger reveal is humble, which makes it feel true. There were no time travelers. There were travelers in time's ordinary direction, in more waves than we wrote down, some of them thin and temporary, some of them thick enough to fossilize, all of them leaving edges and ash that survive better than a body does. Tools before humans, resolves to. Tools before these bones. And the answer to the smaller riddle solves a larger one. Who are we? We are a composite made by corridors. We are the sum of meetings and bowls between rains. We are the ghosts, made visible by choosing to call ourselves one thing across time. There is a time when it might have gone differently, when one of the early waves that taught our ancestors to breathe thinner air or cut a cleaner edge could have been the wave that lasted. That didn't happen. We happened instead. But we carry them anyway. They are handprints under our paint. From the saddle, the past pours its light into late afternoon. The wind has that exhausted sweetness hills breathe when the sun's temper breaks. You let your eyes unfocus and the valley systems go abstract. 3-combed fans of possibility, a memory of water dried to geometry. You think about categories dissolving, species as districts rather than walls, arrival as a chorus of first notes, spread over measures rather than a downbeat, modern as a costume we put on over several acts with other casts helping with the zipper. A small thing catches you hard as any number. A child's footprint fossilized in lake mud miles from here. Age uncertain, species uncertain. The toes spread slightly as if the ground were cooler than the air. Somewhere a boy or girl ran across a wet edge to prove to themselves that they could run faster than their shadow. The track cured to clay. The clay turned to stone. The stone waited, upthrust, ground, weathered, until a person in your century came along with a notebook and the same impulse. We think we're chasing answers. Mostly we're learning to ask older questions in places that will still listen. You stand because the past is starting to turn blue. You angle back toward camp the long way, touching the lip of each bowl with your palm like greeting old dogs. The hammerstone goes back where you found it because some useful objects belong to time more than to us. At the edge of the last shallow water you crouch and wash powder from your fingertips. Dragonflies are still writing cursive. A toad bleats like a tiny trumpet. Close by, a reed snapped at a human height creaks in the small wind. Night is generous here. It arrives gradually and then suddenly, as if someone dragged a thumb down the sky to smudge it softer. You make a small, careful fire in a sandy dent and sit where the smoke doesn't find your eyes. Sparks go up and find their constellations. Orion throws his shoulder the way he did for the people whose hearth you touched this morning, the same way he will when no one remembers your name. In the orange light you take the last pages in your notebook and list the quiet reveals, the ones you want to keep even when the stories start to blur. The lake's clocks and the cave's glass agreeing on a winter that predated our local debut. The fact that ghost populations only means not yet known, and should be spoken as a promise, not a spook. The way a technology can cross a contact zone faster than bodies, and how that turns impossible tools into possible neighbors. The truth that we are rows and braids, not lines. The exact relief in realizing that tools are not time travelers, people are, and our travel is made of patience, seasons, and the arrogance to carry fire between bowls. You bank the coals and lie down where the ground has remembered 1,000 bodies. The wind combs your hair in the same direction it combed theirs. Just before sleep loosens your grip, you picture tomorrow in miniature, you, walking out of the past with a bag of labeled dirt and a head full of clocks, you, writing an email in a town whose name didn't exist last century, explaining to a collaborator across an ocean why a hearth in a forgotten basin is not a paradox but a correction, you, climbing a flight of stairs, short of breath for no good reason, and thinking, absurdly and exactly, of a gene from a girl whose mother was Neanderthal and whose father was Denisovan. You sleep with that thought, and wake once to an owl drawing a figure 8 between two bowls like a careful teacher. Its wings make no sound. The lesson doesn't need one. At first light, you shoulder the pack and follow the river of bowls downhill. It's ordinary. That's the miracle. Edges. Ash. Ryans. Clocks. Doors. Ghosts that turn out to be relatives you already look like. Everything moving in the same direction, wave after wave after wave, toward the same ocean.